There is a new king when it comes to video game controller innovations, and it's Valve. And it's been that way for a long time, but that hasn't always been the case. Nintendo, for an extremely long time, they were the kings, the absolute kings of controller innovation. I mean, Nintendo developed the D-pad, the face buttons, the shoulder buttons. They developed the analog joystick, which allowed Mario to, sneak if you pushed it just a little bit, or run if you were pushing it all the way. They were the first ones to popularize using accelerometers and motion controls in gaming. And then later on, after the Wii, with the Wii Motion Plus, they added in gyroscopic controls in 2009. And pretty much every single time Nintendo put out one of these new innovations in controls for video games, everybody else tried to copy them. Now, sometimes this was to our benefit, like when Sony decided to make the DualShock controller for the PlayStation, doubling the number of analog joysticks and making the analog joysticks so much more comfortable than on the Nintendo 64. But most of the time, when these companies attempted to copy Nintendo, they always just kind of ended up feeling like an also ran. And Nintendo's innovation after innovation after innovation kept them competitive where their extremely limited hardware could not. But I feel like it's been a while. Yeah, the Switch is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to, just unit sales alone. But nobody is really trying to copy what Nintendo's doing when it comes to the Switch controls.
One of my favorite hobbies other than video games is photography. And there's a phrase that photographers use that pretty much everybody knows. And that's that the best camera is the camera that you have with you. Most of the time they're referring to phones. Phones are really, really good cameras these days. But that also applies to the gaming space. The best way to play video games is on whatever device you happen to have with you. Now, whenever I do come out here to get some pictures, I have a lot of stuff to bring with me. And that means I don't have room for a full-fledged gaming system. And that's where the Backbone comes in real handy, because the best gaming system is the one that you have with you. And I always have my phone with me. I don't really like playing games on my phone because my thumbs get in the way, but with the Backbone, it's just like playing on a regular video game system. The Backbone controller is designed to turn your phone into a next-gen handheld device like the Xbox or the PlayStation. And the Backbone app allows you to save clips, upload them, and even get a hold of your friends and pick up exactly where you left off the last time you were playing. And the Backbone controller allows you to play games from the cloud, Xbox, PlayStation, and with the new iPhone 15 Pro Max, which is the one that I have hooked up to my Backbone, you can play games like Resident Evil Village without streaming them from anywhere, right on your phone with ray tracing. I want to give a massive thank you to Backbone for supporting the channel. And if you want to support the channel, then pick up a Backbone of your own at playbackbone.com, or it's easier to just use the link in the description down below.
Now, I do think that we've seen Sony trying to innovate in the controller space. The DualSense controller is incredible. And like right now, I think it's probably my favorite controller. I like it more than the Xbox controller, but I prefer the way that the Xbox controller feels in the hands. I think the ergonomics are better. But feature-wise, the DualSense controller is just leaps and bounds ahead of the Xbox controller. Though the controller is feature-rich, I feel like most devs just ignore it. And why wouldn't they ignore those features? They're not available on any of the other platforms that they are developing for. So why put all the money and dev hours into making these features work on the PlayStation when they're not going to work on a big percentage of your customer base? It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that just leaves Valve. Valve has to be 100% the king at controller innovation these days, which is really strange because nobody is trying to copy what Valve is doing with controllers. But here's the secret sauce that I think makes Valve the absolute kings when it comes to controller innovation, and it's their software. And Valve's Steam Input is one of the most underrated, underused, and underappreciated bits of software in the gaming space. But before we talk about Steam Input, let's rewind a little bit back to the beginning. The Steam controller was released on November 10th, 2015 for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Valve originally released it alongside their failed Steam machines with the goal of allowing players the ability to play games on a controller that were built with a mouse and keyboard in mind.
So the first game we're going to show you is Portal 2. One of the most important features of the controller is that the two trackpads are fully configurable. What we're showing here is what we call legacy mode, which is playing a game that hasn't been modified at all to support the controller. So this is just standard keyboard and mouse style Portal 2. But the controller is acting like a mouse and keyboard and is mapped to output keyboard events that Portal expects. Since the two trackpads can be configured independently, we use the right-hand pad here to do a one-to-one view control mode. It's important to distinguish between a joystick, which does a relative or velocity-based movement, and this one-to-one mode where you directly move your thumb a fixed amount of distance on the pad, and the view will correspond with the fixed amount of distance. At the same time, the left pad is configured like a D-pad, where it's divided up into pie-shaped segments, where up and down is the W and S keys, and left and right are the A and D keys, so we can walk around like you would with a walk joystick.
You are not alone.
The Steam controller was met with mixed reviews. Some people, like me, thought it was absolutely fantastic and innovative and one of the greatest things to happen to gaming in years, while other people didn't really like the ergonomics, and they didn't like that it was missing a D-pad and a second stick. The controller essentially fell on its face. It wasn't popular, and then Valve got sued for the design of the back paddles, so all of these factors led to Valve eventually just having a fire sale to clear out inventory and then stop manufacturing the Steam controller. Finding one is going to cost you a pretty penny unless you are very lucky. I will say that I did make a video about how Valve took the failure of Steam machines and the Steam controller and turned it into success with Linux, and I will link to that video at the end of this video. But the controller wasn't perfect. You had to hold it in an odd way. It was cradled by your fingers instead of gripped by your palms. The bumpers were loud, clunky, and felt really hollow. The face buttons, they were way too small and rounded in my opinion, and the whole thing felt pretty cheap. But in spite of all that, the Steam controller remains one of my all-time favorite controllers, and I cannot wait for Valve to make another one, but we'll get to that later. If you ask fans of the Steam controller what hardware features they feel like made the Steam controller awesome, a lot of people are going to say gyro. Obviously, people are going to say the trackpads. People are going to say the dual stage triggers, which a lot of people forget about because that's not something that's in the Steam Deck. But if you take the word hardware out of that question, I think nearly all of the answers would coalesce to Steam Input, the software. I mean, it has to be. Hardware is fixed, it's finite. Once it's shipped, it is what it is. But software is gooey, it's malleable, and it can be changed after they ship it. And not only that, but it can be changed based on user feedback. So things that Valve never thought of can be added to it later based on what millions of people come up with. Just take a look at this timeline, which I will add is 7 years out of date as I record this. All of this is done without any input or extra work from the video game developers. Remember earlier when I mentioned the DualSense controller and I said that devs are essentially ignoring the extra features because it creates more work for them? Well, with Steam Input, it gives all of that power to the end users, and the devs don't have to lift a finger. Steam Input lets us decide how best to implement controls for pretty much any game we want, as long as the devs try and avoid locking the mouse and camera controls while the gamepad is active, making sure that a game can handle gamepad and keyboard and mouse controls simultaneously, and it doesn't have flashing hints. And what it unlocks is absolutely bonkers. You can have action layers that mean different buttons can do different things based on certain conditions. It gives you essentially unlimited inputs, so piano games like Star Wars: The Old Republic are absolutely playable on a controller without having all the keys of a keyboard, because you really don't need them once you learn how to use Steam Input. If you're lucky enough to have a controller that has trackpads, you can create in-game menus that give you access to crazy amounts of inputs just by touching the pad, moving your thumb a little bit, and then picking it back up. And on top of that, the menus can be customized with images so you know exactly what they're going to do without having to remember that C is for character, or K is for skills, or G is for guild, while O is for social. All of that stuff is hard to keep up here in your head, but when it just shows a picture of a group of people, you say, oh, that must be my guild. Hell, you can even configure your trackpads to only be a very small part of your screen. The mouse will actually jump to that section of the screen until you do your input. Then when you pick your thumb back up, it'll go right back to where it was. It's incredibly useful in games like real-time simulator games, which you normally wouldn't be able to play on the couch. You would be trapped at a desk, but you're not trapped at a desk thanks to Steam Input. And Steam Input allows you to add flick stick to your controller, which Valve didn't invent, but once they saw what it could do, they implemented it into Steam Input and gave credit to the person who actually made it, which is awesome. If you don't know what flick stick is, this is going to blow your mind. Rather than continually pushing a joystick in the direction to move your camera, if you want to look behind you, simply flick the stick down. If you want to look to your right, flick it to the right. It lets you spin around in 360 no scope faster than any mouse is going to do it. I personally am terrible at it. I think I have too many years of muscle memory built up using controllers in a more traditional way, but I have seen people playing games with flick stick, and it is unbelievable how fast they are able to line up on somebody and take them out. Now, if you can do all of these amazing things, why isn't anybody copying Valve? Well, I don't think console makers really want to give us more options, and I say this as somebody who is a console gamer. Sure, Microsoft and Sony have been dabbling a bit in accessibility features, but consoles are locked down. They always have been. They always will be. Hell, even recently, Microsoft has started restricting which controllers you can use with your Xbox, and with good reason. The more input devices you have, the easier it is for somebody to come up with a way to use those input devices to cheat at a game. And you can easily do this with a Steam controller or a Steam Deck. Let me give you a couple of examples. Modern golf games tie your swing to the right stick, but did you know that you can restrict your right stick in order to only accept inputs that are straight up and straight down? So when you push down on your right stick and your character does his backswing, and then you flick that stick forward and then they hit the ball, it will always go in a perfect straight line if you set it up that way. And if you want to play Street Fighter, but you prefer the controls like Smash, where all of the special moves are tied to which direction you flick the right stick, you can do that too, thanks to Steam Input. And those are just two examples off the top of my head. I'm sure that there are plenty of you watching this right now that are going to come up with way more clever ways to use Steam Input than I ever will. So I do understand why console makers won't develop something as cool as Steam Input. But the PC is the Wild West, and you can install anything you want on your computer, so essentially Steam Input is fair game. Now, the Steam controller came out in 2015 and fell on its face, so Steam Input is still around. It is, though I would think that most people probably are completely unaware of it. Hell, I don't even think that I can use it to its full potential. It's just crazy how powerful it is, but I think that that's starting to change thanks to the Steam Deck. Steam Input was kind of buried in Steam, and if you didn't really need it to play most games, people just kind of ignored it. But the Steam Deck shows it off every single chance it gets. Start up a game, you're going to get a little boot animation that tells you what the controls are like. Every time you hit the Steam menu button on your Steam Deck, it brings up an option when you're playing a game, and you can see where you can change the controls right there. And on top of that, Valve is making it easier and easier to share the profiles that you make with Steam Input with other people. Because Steam Deck is the new big picture mode, you're constantly shown that controller icon, and configuration of Steam Input is way easier now than it was even just a year ago. But not only that, Valve has been getting more feedback than ever. The Steam Deck is really popular. It spent more than a year as the top seller on Steam, and it just recently dropped off only to come right back rushing to the top once the OLED Steam Deck was announced. And with more Steam Decks out there, that means that people are getting used to big picture mode, seeing those patch notes when they update, and getting new features, and easily experimenting with simple changes in Steam input, if for nothing else than just to change the back paddles on their Steam Deck. Essentially, the Steam Deck is training people on how to use Steam input. It's still really complex, but it's also simpler than it's ever been, and their UI designers for Steam input have got to be working overtime. It shows. I mean, just in the past few months, Valve has changed how the gyro works on the Steam Deck. It's been in beta for a while, but with SteamOS 3.5 out now, everyone is starting to see the new experimental gyro to mouse and gyro to joystick modes. As people use these modes, they will give Valve valuable feedback, and we all know that Valve is listening to feedback intently. Just look at the OLED Steam Deck as a perfect example of Valve listening. So Steam input just keeps getting better and better, and the reason it's so great is because devs don't have to do anything. But if you want to use it outside the PC space, you are just beat. Valve knows this, and as people are starting to get a better understanding of how powerful Steam input is and how cool the various hardware features are, they have been asking Valve over and over and over again, when are you going to give me a new Steam controller? One that's just like the Steam Deck with the screen removed. One thing is for sure, Valve is using the Steam Deck in order to push people towards their store, and it's working. I guess that makes the Steam Deck the Trojan horse, and Steam input the wheels that the horse is sitting on. Now, with the Steam controller, unfortunately, Valve was completely unsuccessful when it came to that device. And because of that, everybody just shrugged and moved on. But the Steam Deck is really popular. It's selling by the millions. And so I think that we're going to start seeing people sit up and pay attention to what Valve is doing with this. And not just having a handheld PC, but the form factor and the software. We've already seen companies like Asus and the ROG Ally attempt to duplicate the form factor, and we've seen the Lenovo Legion Go add trackpads. Unfortunately, they don't do all that much. But I don't think that we'll really start to see the copycats come out in droves until Valve makes SteamOS available for whatever hardware you want. Valve has said repeatedly that that is absolutely something that they plan on doing. They mentioned that in their original IGN video, and they have even repeated that recently. I do wonder if devices like the Ally or the Go would have launched with Windows if SteamOS was actually ready. I guess we'll never know. Anyway, one thing is for sure, and that Valve is the top innovator when it comes to controls these days. And if you want to see another example of how Valve turned failure into success, check out this video right here. From the NerdNest, I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.